Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. If you could just bear with us a couple of minutes, we'll start shortly. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar session. Today we're going to talk about understanding the Lync deployment options that you have, whether they be cloud, hosted, or on-premise. The objective of today's session is to give you as much of an open and honest appraisal as we can, with the expertise that we have in the room today, around the different options you have when deploying Lync. So it starts off with the assumption that you've already done the evaluation of Lync and you've got to a point where you've decided that Lync is right for you or for your business. This forms one of a series of webinars that we're running, looking at the whole journey towards UC and Lync. Today is about covering from the why you should look at Lync, why you should look at UC as a strategy, and moving forward into then how you actually deploy it and what you need to know there. The speakers today will be James Rodd, who is the CEO and co-founder of Modality Systems. James has over 10 years experience in the commercial world of IT, and has led Modality Systems to year-on-year growth for the last 7 years. And he will be accompanied by Tom Arbuthnot, who is a senior managing consultant here at Modality Systems. He's also an MCM, so a bit of a Jedi Master with Microsoft, and a MVP, so most valuable professional. Both statuses are recognition of Tom's contribution towards the UC industry and the community. And he is renowned for lots of blogging, authorships of books, and speaking at various other industry and Microsoft events. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand the floor over to James Rodd.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Most of you, if you have met me, we're pleased to know I've got a fairly small stint, and then we'll hand over to Tom, who'll drill down into the detail that's required. One of the main things that we want to really take a look at, and basis is the left-hand box there. It's really important to get to the why. Once you understand the why part, you can then move on to exactly what you're going to do. If you take a look back at the previous seminar we ran a few weeks ago, did a quick review on a UC market survey conducted last year, and it clearly shows there's not a huge amount of movement, in that it's just over a third of the marketplace are actually adopting and dropping unified comms technologies into their organizations. And even with that on its own, it's less than 10% of their user base that is basically taking ownership of that technology. And part of the common kind of feedback as the problem is that lack of business case, lack of aligning it to what the organization really needed and what they wanted to get out of a project, and then just not deploying to meet those objectives. So measure the ROI against what you want your organization to achieve. And trying to give you a bit of an idea as to how we want to view that is this slide. Trying to put it in a graphical sense made most sense to ourselves. All of the green boxes on the left-hand side really look at the hard cost savings, and organisations are adopting and deploying unified communications, link-based technology to address one, some, or all of those in their own right. But more importantly, it's not just around the technical functionality of the solution. The darker blue boxes really address the productivity gains that organisations are starting to see and feel. The real softer costs that are quite difficult to justify to some finance departments. Bit of middle ground in the purple, really addressing environmental issues, taking travel concerns, and using technology to address them. And then the grey boxes at the bottom, something that's becoming more important with staff recruitment and retention, which is their overall satisfaction. There's a pretty generic SurveyMonkey report that looks at the top 13 questions that you'd quiz and check your employee satisfaction on, and it gives you the benchmark across the industry, and Lync really does address that. In summary, if you take the full why and you want to address every single point that's on this chart, Lync and UC becomes a very compelling differentiator. But obviously, trying to address every one of those boxes can be pretty comprehensive and presents challenges across the board. Just taking, the one final slide before I hand over to Tom to start looking at the technologies is really around what drives that deployment strategy, and trying to keep it into four, succinct as we possibly could, areas. We take a look at project objectives and goals, and for us, it's really looking at business as usual objectives. Most of what's been drawn down is to say, save more money and keep the systems going. Keep cost reduction, travel, IT tech services down, technology refreshes. It's very rare you find companies that are just born into several hundreds and thousands of employees. You've typically got an evolution of investment in technology. Plus the introduction of cloud, Office 365, driving collaboration efficiency from any site, from anywhere, from home. It's really, take a view that objectives and goals are more what you've experienced day to day. Applications and integrations on the left-hand side. We see that it's more convergence of the end user experience. If you take a look at what happened in the late 90s and early 2000s, you saw a lot of kind of what I call back-end architectural convergence. Voice and data networks coming together, IP telephony, voice over IP was introduced. What we're now seeing is the user's experience needing to become more and more converged, in effect unifying the user experience. And that addresses what you've got in existing infrastructure, your own data center investment, and what's available from the cloud, your existing investments, not just in hardware, capital costs, and physical office space, but also licensing, entitlement. You look at Microsoft's licensing model, and most people recognize that as being fairly complex, but also very, very comprehensive if you embrace every line on the rather long Excel spreadsheet and price list. We take a skip up to the top right-hand side, and we start thinking about business requirements. Increasingly now, and something we've seen as a very strong trend over the last 7 years, is that IT is moving closer and closer to the board strategy, more so than ever before. It's seen as a massive differentiator for organisations, not only to their own employees, staff, and working processes, but also to their own vertical market competition. If you can demonstrate that your business has embraced technology and is running as efficiently and effectively as you possibly can, then you will significantly stand out. Especially if you drop back a couple of slides and say if less than 3% of the market are actually using this technology, but close to 100% of those people are seeing substantial gains and advantages, then there's still huge potential for significant differentiation. And the last point before we hand over to Tom is really to address your own skills and resources. It's kind of summarised as in-house capabilities, but it's more general capabilities of the market. Are you able to run it all yourselves? Do you need to look at specialist partners to assist? Or do you just want to outsource and pass off full responsibility for service-related technology? Technology is becoming more and more advanced. However, it's also becoming more easily consumed. and everybody's taking as a service, infrastructure as a service, software as a service. It doesn't matter. So that's a very quick summary sum through that kind of pulls on the why, because it makes sense and there is substantial ROI to be made if you address all the key points of it. But there's a number of different areas, and just the 4 here really kind of say exactly how do I go about doing this. So to drill down as to whether or not you go cloud, hosted, private, public, and otherwise, I'm going to hand you over to Tom Arbuthnot, and he'll take you through the next few slides.
Hi everybody, thanks for taking the time to join. Some of you I think I know, and some of you I probably don't, and hopefully we'll get to know. We'll be diving into kind of the various deployment models, and it will be, as some of you guys know, I'm a technical guy, but also considering operational and commercial, because really it is the combination of those 3 things that help define your deployment model. We'll be taking questions at the end, so if you guys want to jot them down and you can fire them in at the end, all questions are welcome. So as we look at deployment models, there's really a whole variety of deployment models, and as a consultant, obviously I can think of all the variables, and it's totally an it depends. But obviously, to take you guys through something useful today, we're going to try and divide them into some logical containers. So we've got these three different options with some sub options in. We have public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid. And if you listen to general kind of IT press at the moment and vendor marketing, you hear public cloud, private cloud a lot. And if you particularly listen to Microsoft, you'll hear hybrid a lot too. Obviously, Microsoft are in a unique position to offer a hybrid between their public cloud and their private cloud, which gives us even more options in terms of deployments. So first, we're going to look at the public cloud. So what is public cloud? Well, the reality is that term is not terribly tightly defined. But generally it refers to an off-site subscription-based model where you pay for service and you're not responsible for deploying it. So Office 365 is the obvious example there. As we move forward to this slide, you can see Office 365 is what we talk about first. So you guys probably all know what Office 365 is, but it's a pay per user per month offering for the whole Microsoft Office stack. Here we're particularly talking about Lync Online. There's also options of public cloud via hosted partners, and we'll talk about them next. So in terms of actual physical deployment model, there's no hardware on-prem for Office 365. You pay via an EA or via a credit card, you get an account, you sign in over the internet, and away you go. And certainly the marketing says it's as simple as that. The reality is there's still some things to consider. So in terms of benefits, it definitely is a relatively quick deployment. You still need to roll out software on the desktops, you still need to consider other aspects, but relative to deploying servers on-prem, it's certainly quicker and easier. And you can scale that deployment up or down as you please. So this is great for things like seasonal variants. So for example, if you're in professional services and you have a big graduate intake, you're in retail and you have a busy season, or you're in education and you take on a large number of, say, students for half the year, a public cloud model allows you to scale up and down without changing your back-end resource. So there are some definite benefits to it. Also, with Microsoft, they're kind of putting the cloud first in some respects in terms of their development. So Office 365 will get updates and patches and changes before the on-prem equivalents. That can be a blessing and a curse in some respects. It means you get the latest code, but it also means you're on a very quick churn in terms of change. The key thing is there's no responsibility for you running the service. You pay for a service, you get the service. That's what people typically think about when they think about public cloud. In terms of considerations, there are limited feature sets. So you'll hear Lync talked about and Lync Online talked about, and they're largely the same thing, but actually with Office 365 and Lync Online, you don't get all the features you would get in deploying Lync Server, which is typically the on-prem model. So for example, you don't get enterprise voice in Office 365. So you can't deploy PSTN numbers, so a phone number on Office 365. You can only do what's called kind of PC to PC audio and video, so VoIP calls, but no PSTN calls. And the same goes for any advanced voice features like response groups. So you can't have a voice hunt group in Office 365. So if voice is a key part of your considerations for a deployment, then at this moment Office 365 might not be what you need in terms of meeting your requirements. There's also some non-voice features that aren't available in Office 365. So a big one is persistent chat. So that's quite big in finance. A lot of finance houses use that heavily, and it's just a persistent chat room that you can join and leave as you please, and the whole instant message conversation stays there. That's not in Office 365. Going beyond just feature set limitations, there's also some things about the way it's deployed that influence what you can do. So typically it's going to be deployed and you're connecting over the internet. You can't guarantee your quality of your voice or your video on the internet. You can buy a big pipe, a gig pipe to the internet, and the odds are your connection will be good or excellent most of the time, but that's not the same as having a guaranteed quality connection that you can on a private network. Obviously, you don't own the servers or the service, so you can't do any third-party integrations. So when you see people talk about Lync ISVs or partner offerings that do, say, switchboards or recording or ethical rules and compliance or anything advanced around Lync, a lot of those require server level access to actually work, so you can't deploy them in Lync Online even though you have Lync on your desktop. There's also limited administration options. So in the aim of being orderly and kind of a single service for millions of people, not every single admin option is surfaced in Lync Online. Interestingly, there is an ability to move between online and on-prem, which we'll talk about later. So you're not limiting yourself by starting on Office 365 as you were previously. There's now a way to go from 365 to on-prem and on-prem to 365. And the last consideration there is, even though you're buying this and kind of it's an instant on, you still have to think about client rollout, you still have to think about training. So it doesn't remove certain deployment requirements that are still there just because you're outsourcing the service. So that's specifically Microsoft's Office 365, but there are public cloud offerings from third parties that we can talk about. So just moving on to the next slide, the next option is hosted partners. So these are typically SIs that offer a cloud-like service, but they run Lync in their data centers rather than Microsoft running it. The benefit here is partners that do hosting can offer you more feature sets. So they can offer you enterprise voice, they can offer you a direct connection to their data center, so guaranteed quality of service. They can offer third-party integrations and persistent chat. They have options to deploy all of those for you. However, they're still considering it a kind of multi-tenanted environment, so it won't be completely customized to you. If they offer enterprise voice, they'll typically have a limited range of carriers, for example. So you might not be able to buy a PSTN number in every country that you want. If they have third-party integrations, they'll typically have a predefined list of integrations. So they might work with a certain partner for compliance, but if you want a different partner, they're not going to deploy that in their data center just for you. A big one to consider is their physical geographic locations. Particularly if you're a global company, you have offices all over the world. The nature of voice and video is that you need good network connectivity into wherever your Lync servers are. If your hosted partner only has data centers in APAC and you need an office, say, in America or in the UK, is the connectivity between you and them going to be good enough for you to offer an excellent quality of service for your UC deployments? And like Lync Online, you still need to think about what policies you can control, client rollout and training. The last thing to consider there, and this goes for any third party, but particularly the hosted partners, is talk to them about referenceability. Where are they doing this for a customer similar to you in your vertical, with your reach, with your headcount? You don't want to be the first people trying out a public cloud offering for a vendor. Next, we'll move on to private cloud. So private cloud is again kind of a bit of a fluffy term. It's again used by Microsoft a lot now. It's the new term for on-prem in some ways, and the definition varies. And to be honest, there are, we think, three major variants here that you can consider for what we call private cloud. All of them involve Lync server, so the full Lync on-prem deployments. But there are actually different deployment methodologies here to consider. We'll just wait for the slide to come up there.
Having a few problems.
Sorry, the slides appear to be on a bit of a lag, but I think it's just coming up now. And while that loads, I'll just talk you through the options. There we go. So the traditional on-prem, so this is what a lot of in-house IT guys will be used to. I buy the software from Microsoft, I deploy the software in-house, potentially with a partner, potentially on my own in-house. This is very traditional, and a lot of people do this. With Lync and with unified communications, it reaches out and touches a lot of infrastructure and has a lot of interdependencies on infrastructure that, say, an Exchange or a SharePoint might not have. So typically, if you're going to be doing voice and video in your UC deployment or interoperating with an existing PBX or existing infrastructure, you're probably going to be working with a partner for deployment and for support. It's very few enterprises we see that do anything more than Lync IAM and presence in-house before they're reaching out to a partner for some expert assistance in deployments. And that's no reflection on internal IT, that's just the reality of the complexity of dealing with Lync and servers and networks and hardware load balancers and voice and PBX and doing all of that on a global scale. The next option, and we see this increasingly in the market, is Lync appliances. So these are marketed to be kind of a simpler way to deploy Lync, maybe for a pilot, maybe for 1,000, 2,000 users. Essentially what these are virtual machines that are deployed on a dedicated server that's pre-configured and shipped to you to plug in and install. Marketing sometimes hides some of the complexity of this. It is still full Lync server. It typically needs to be domain joined or ADFS joined to your environment. It's either involves a gateway card in the server or it involves a software SBC that still needs to be connected, that still needs to be configured. There's very little magic in terms of clicking your fingers and deploying Lync just because it's on an appliance. Certainly it will take away having to provision any servers and think about any server scaling and sizing, and it will speed up the deployment because it's all automated in terms of the box. But actually there's still a lot to consider with those Lync appliances. The final option is essentially buying your UC solution as a managed service. And this can be both a managed deployment and an ongoing managed service. And you'll notice we talk about UC solution in this option rather than just Lync, because typically with all three options, unified communications is going to be spread across lots of different appliances that are both Microsoft and non-Microsoft. So for example, voice gateways will involve a Sonos or an audio codes. Hardware load balancers might be Kemp or F5. but your Lync and your UC solution for your business is equally reliant on them as it is on Lync server. So when we talk about a managed service, it typically involves all the aspects of the service, not just Lync server. The interesting thing about looking at it as a managed service is it can be deployed in-house on site in a traditional manner, or it might be deployed in a managed data center. It might even be a kind of partner hosted data center, but a dedicated deployment for you, not a multi-tenant deployment. It's always going to be a full Lync server deployment, but it's actually going to be designed to meet exact customer requirements. So similar to an on-prem deployment, you go through a design phase that will meet your exact requirements, in contrast to a Lync appliance, which might be, well, here's how it goes. You buy multiple of these if you want to add multiple sets of users. And critically, it's a solution that's going to be managed, monitored, and have a service level agreement with a partner. So this is interesting because some of the things we look at when we talk about public cloud actually can apply to private cloud offerings. So I want to outsource my risk and my deployments. I'm going to go to public cloud. In some respects, if you look at managed service solutions, you can have an on-prem, but you can manage it like a cloud offering, and even in some cases have commercial agreements where you're paying for it in an OpEx model rather than a CapEx model. So plenty of options with private cloud. We'll move on in a second to what private cloud looks like. It can be simple to incredibly complex depending on the size and scale of your organization. And this is where the question comes up is, do I manage it in-house or do I manage it out with a third party? At the simplest level, you can see that there's a single server deployment, essentially Microsoft talk about. The reality is that's a few virtual servers. So at the minimum, it's going to be a single Lync server, an Office web app server, probably a SQL server, probably an edge server, which gives you external connectivity. So you can see, even in the simplest deployment, it's not really a single server, but it can be deployed on a single virtual server or a pair of virtual servers. So it can be to you physically for a high availability system potentially. And then as we move to the diagram on the right, that's an example of a two-site deployment, and it looks considerably more complex, and that's only really the beginning of how complex it could get. You see there we have 3 Lync servers on each site for resilience. That number can go right up to 12 depending on scaling, multiple SQL servers, multiple edge servers, all with the aim of dealing with a larger user load and no single point of failure. And so when you look at these deployment models, obviously these are generic examples, but you can start to think of which of the two your organization is going to fall into, and maybe it's different in different regions, and how do you deal with managing that deployment either in-house or in data centers. The blue items are all DMZ, so that's for external connectivity. In terms of private cloud, let's look at some of the benefits. So all private cloud offerings have the full Lync server deployment. That's kind of a definition of private cloud for us, which means they allow you to control the full experience, allowing quality of service. You control the network, you control the integration to third-party systems. This means, unlike the public cloud offerings, you can integrate to your existing infrastructure. So typically, for example, your existing PBX. If you're deploying Lync for voice, the odds are you're not deploying it for everybody day one for enterprise voice. There will be a period of coexistence with an existing PBX. With any private cloud option, you can integrate Lync to the private PBX, usually via a gateway, and that allows you to make calls between the two systems. Looking specifically at the 3 models and the relative benefits, going the traditional on-prem model, you get to do the full deployment, meet your exact requirements. You get to do have in-house control, so your IT team, your compliance team can typically work with the partner to have full control over the deployment and fully understand it. And obviously, third-party application integration is completely open to you. That's both applications and infrastructure in reality. You can do whatever you want. You own that system. It is on your site. Looking at the appliance model, the real potential benefit there is a quick deployment, an easy deployment. I don't have to order servers. I don't have to think about speccing my VMs. I don't have to think about a long design phase to work out the exact requirements. I can buy this appliance and shortcut some of that process. Benefit of UC as a managed service, really the real benefit there is you're getting the benefit of Lync on-prem, but without the responsibility of having to manage it in-house or deploy it in-house. So you're getting the best in terms of features and functionality, but you're also getting some of the best of a public cloud world where you can just pay and have an SLA and have a service, and it's not ultimately your responsibility. Obviously, there's also some considerations for private cloud. Again, breaking them down into on-premise, appliance, and UC as a managed service. So for on-premise, you can have all functionality, but that also means you've got to support all functionality. If you roll out something like persistent chat to your users, you need to know how to support that. The ability to integrate third-party software is fantastic, but again, think about supportability. You can't deploy these things and walk away. They need looking after. You have full in-house capability in terms of management, but that means you have to have a team that's looking after the management of these services. And typically, I mean, almost always in reality, you're going to have some kind of third-party support. That could be Microsoft, that could be an accredited partner, or it could be both. Interesting to note that Microsoft support Lync fully and support voice fully, but don't support third-party appliances, so things like gateways or hardware load balancers. So if you need to bridge that gap, you either need a good in-house team, or you need a partner with those expertise to bridge that gap. Considerations on the appliance. Deployment models will be limited in reality, that there's only certain appliances you can buy with certain set models. Think about support on appliances. Often you have to have accredited partners to support them. So even though it's the Lync server bits, you can't necessarily go from one support organization to another and expect support because it's a slightly customized deployment. Third-party integration, it is Lync server, but will the appliance vendor support you integrating third-party applications to that appliance, and does that impact your support? Think about domain join. Just because it's an appliance, it still needs to be domain joined. There's still some kind of shared ownership, responsibility, and security considerations. And does it support hybrid models, which we'll go on to next? Not all appliances do. In terms of considerations for UC as a managed service, obviously some of the above apply, but the main one really is thinking about how your internal corporate technical and security policies and procedures internally work with a partner organisation. If you're an organisation that typically works with partners, it can be very smooth. If this is the first partner working in your organisation being responsible for something like this, then it needs to be thought through. The reality is that most PBXs are supported by external partners today. So if you look at it in terms of that, it's hopefully not a huge mind shift. The other thing to consider, again, in partners in general, is about partner reach and capabilities. You're entrusting a core business system here. You need to think about who the partner is and what their abilities, their referenceability, and their capabilities are. So finally, for me, hybrid. So we've talked about public cloud, Office 365 hosted partners. We've talked about private cloud on-prem. And interestingly, in the Lync world, we have this option to deploy both. We can connect the two together and have a mix of Office 365 users or hosted users and on-prem users. So often this is referred to as kind of the best of both worlds. in some deployments, it will be a mix of Lync users online and on-prem, and in some deployments, it will simply be having Exchange unified messaging online, so your mailbox online and your Lync users on-prem. So what are the benefits of hybrid, and what are the considerations? So the ability to move between cloud and on-prem is obviously a huge benefit. You can start on cloud with your hundreds of thousands of users, and as you deploy enterprise voice, you can move them to on-prem, or you can deal with seasonal demand on Office 365, and you can have your core users on-prem. Leveraging Exchange in the cloud while having your core Lync services on-prem is obviously nice as well. And yeah, we talked about scaling. There's also a lot of considerations. Inherently, it's a more complex deployment. You're supporting two environments and integrating between those environments. You have to have Lync Edge infrastructure to connect yourself to the cloud. The feature set still varies between cloud and on-prem. So your cloud users don't get enterprise voice, even though you have enterprise voice deployed on-prem. If they have persistent chat, they only have it if they're on-prem. They don't have it in the cloud. There's some key support dependencies to be aware of as well. Microsoft will only support you in a hybrid mode if you keep your server versions and patching up to date. If you're too many levels down in terms of your Lync servers on-prem and you have an issue, you'll be expected to upgrade before you get any level of support. Something that people bring up a lot that isn't available is split workloads. So I want to have my Lync users on-prem and give them persistent chat and IM and presence, but I want them to do conferencing in the cloud because that scales well. Or I want to do enterprise voice on-prem, but I want to do IM and presence in the cloud. That's not available. You pick one or the other. So you have to make your choice and stick to it. Finally, licensing. There's many licensing models. Typically for Office 365, you'll be given an E4 license subscription, which gives you the ability to run enterprise voice on-prem. You might also be talking about SPLA licensing. You might also be talking about EAs. There's various variables there that we can take you through individually. But the licensing, just because you've got Office 365, doesn't negate the need for licensing on-prem. You still have to license your on-prem Lync servers, your Windows licenses, your SQL cows, and you have to think carefully about your whole licensing estate when you're deciding about either online, on-prem, or hybrid. So I'll now pass over for the key takeaways for the technical session.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Just a couple more slides, and then I think there's a couple of questions have come through since we've been going. So we'll take a pause in a second and try and answer those for you. Key takeaways we would urge as a result of what you've been listening to today is, first and foremost, match the business requirements to the deployment model. Obviously, if you decide you want to achieve all of the business benefits we laid out earlier on in this slide deck, then you'll need some kind of dedicated deployment model. If, however, you just want to drive desktop collaboration, then it may be that an Office 365 solution is going to be adequate for what you're trying to achieve. But really, please do put a significant emphasis on matching business requirements to the deployment model. Once you can decide what's technically viable and not viable, work through the challenges, work through the resources you have, the infrastructure you have yourselves, the global reach potentially if you're looking at outsourcing it or passing it off to an external hoster. Understand the technical limitations on that basis. Overarching both of those is that fundamental design. This is a relatively new technology stack, delivering real-time communications in a pure software-based solution. Whilst even Lync now has been around for various pre-versions, about 10, 11 years, software-based comms is still relatively new. So make sure you seek advice at the beginning in terms of the design, in terms of execution and server builds, etc. Become more accessible to the masses, but get the design right. And then the last piece is going to be choosing the right partner. Hopefully we've kind of addressed pros and cons along each of the options in a fairly neutral fashion throughout. Modality are indeed a partner that could work with you to help in any project, scale, style, capability, what have you. But depending on what you want to achieve, make sure you choose the right partner with the right skill set. There are a few very specialist partners in each of the areas we've discussed today, and there's nothing quite like getting the right one to make it a success. Just as a little bit of background, the obligatory one slide on who we are and what we do. Basically, the numbers here just hope to provide a level of comfort and confidence that the reason why we can prepare the content for not only this webinar but the series of 7 that we have is because we've got now that 7-8 years as Modality Systems in delivering such solutions, technologies and services to our customer base, but collectively as a group of users, in excess of 20-25 years now in various streams of communications technology. I shan't dwell on that. You can all read. We have a website, and obviously I'd encourage you to contact us if you have anything specific you would like to discuss. Last kind of generic summary, I hope, to pop up is just a reiteration of the Journey to UC series of webinars. This is number 2 in the program, kind of the why and the how. The following 5 guys running on a fortnightly basis. We will follow up with emails and links to be able to register, and see if we can inform and educate you any way further as we go. Other than that, that's the core bulk of the session so far. And at this point, I think we're just going to have a quick look at some questions. So we need to read those quickly, or perhaps get Ian to read them out loud. If anybody else has got something else, please feel free to drop the questions into the channel that should be in front of you.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Tom. I think a couple of you have reported 1 or 2 issues early on in this session. Hopefully you've managed to hear everything, but if not, please reach out to us at the details on the screen now. There's been a couple of good questions coming through, so if I throw this over to Tom and James. First one is, who provides a public cloud Microsoft 365 E4 with PSTN services in the UK?
So it's an interesting question. I mean, E4 is the right to use enterprise voice, and who provides a public cloud with PSTN access? There's a few partners in the UK and a few that sub that out as well. Outsourcery comes to mind as an obvious one.
Yeah, there's typically 3 primary UK players. Outsourcery, mostly made famous by one of the founders appearing on Dragon's Den, and they went public last year. Always On, and then Sipcom. A couple of the larger players, as Tom said, seem to sub out. I know Applicable are a 4th that have been establishing a presence in this country. In terms of evaluate the solution, definitely seek references and check scalability as well. But they would be the kind of private providers that host Lync to be able to provide you with PSTN and therefore E4 functionality.
Okay, thank you. There's another question actually very similar to the first one. Can we deploy Office 365 E4 with Microsoft Lync providing PSTN services in the cloud without having on-prem Lync deployment to augment Office 365 E4?
So it's interesting, this is much misunderstood. E4 is the right to use enterprise voice. But it doesn't mean you get enterprise voice in Microsoft's cloud, and it doesn't mean you can automatically deploy the servers on-prem for free either. It's equivalent to a plus cal in some respects. So the question here is, can you deploy E4 without having servers on-prem? You can transfer your E4 rights to one of the providers we talked about previously in some ways and have them hybrid to Office 365, and you have your link with them with PSTN access and your rest of your suite in Office 365. Similarly, you can work with a managed UC service provider and have them host your Lync servers in a third-party data center have MPLS tails into your network, and therefore you don't have Lync on-prem as such, but you have the full Lync service. So there are a few different options for having voice without any kit on-prem. The reality is, for voice, you want some servers or gateways close to your users, so typically there will be some on-prem infrastructure.
Certainly Office 365 is a hot topic at the moment. Another question that's just come through, and I think you partially answered it, Tom, but just to make sure, are Microsoft doing enterprise voice on 365?
The million-dollar question. They've stated publicly multiple times there's definitely an aspiration to offer what they call PSTN voice in Office 365. In terms of information that's public, they've stated twice at Lync Conference that will be coming. There's no firm dates in the public domain. There's no detail of what the feature set will be, if indeed the feature set will be equivalent to Lync on-prem. And certainly E4 is not a right to have voice in the cloud with Microsoft. They made that very clear. E4 is equivalent to a +cal for Lync server. So something will be coming, but who knows what and when is the reality.
Okay, and there is yet another question on 365, so they keep coming in. The benefits of 365 over DIY is Lync and SharePoint and Office integration in the cloud. It's not just about Lync Online. Interested on your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think the tone of that question is, if I do Lync Online, I don't have to worry about integrating to SharePoint or Exchange on-prem, because all three are online. And there's certainly some logical benefit to that. It's one service for all of those. Actually, the integration to SharePoint and Exchange is not terribly difficult. It can be complex if you have multiple vendors managing those, but actually the technical integration is relatively simple. For SharePoint, the vast majority of the integration is done client side. For Exchange, it's a simple SIP trunk between the two systems. So yes, you don't have to do any integration if you're doing Lync Online, but the integration is not that complicated that it should massively sway your decision in terms of deployment models, in my opinion.
Okay.
There's also, just along the lines of a 365 as well, and certainly with Exchange integration, it's half been asked by the looks of some notes on some of the questions there. But if you are deploying Lync as your telephony service and therefore want to rely on Exchange unified messaging for your voicemail service, that you can put Lync in an appropriate environment and then rely on Exchange in 365 for the delivery of voicemail. So again, it's a very relatively simple technical piece of work to be done, but it's a simple coexistence there to have a dedicated / managed Lync environment anywhere, but still reliant on Office 365 for your Exchange unified messaging / voicemail service.
Right, another question that's come in, and I think you're going to like this one, Tom, is can I integrate Skype on all of what we've spoken about today?
Yeah, that's another hot topic. Simple answer is yes. The Skype integration and calls between Lync and Skype can be done with either on-prem or online. It's largely involves client-side bits that make that work. Currently, you can do audio. And very soon it's been announced that you can do video. I think the target dates are June, July for that. So soon you'll be able to do video calls between Lync and Skype, and that'll be the same whether you're online or on-prem.
Right, okay. How do you actually deliver a managed service? That's an interesting one.
Yeah, so UC is complicated, obviously. There's lots of moving parts and lots of vendors. In terms of having a managed service, obviously it's for, I can only speak about what Modality do, not what about everybody does. But what we do is we have a global team, a global service desk. We have a mix of off-the-shelf monitoring tools and also customized monitoring tools that our development team have written to test and monitor the service 24 hours a day. And we then have direct connectivity typically into the customer environment to both proactively and reactively deal with issues. Sometimes we even have on-prem staff that are modality staff that work closely with customers, almost as an extension of their IT team, to offer a full managed service that they can rely on for their UC environments.
Okay, brilliant. Right, I think that just about wraps up all the questions now. This session will be available on demand, so if you did miss anything, or there's something you wanted to recap on, please go back and have a look at it. It normally takes sort of 24 hours to be there, but you will get a little email just to remind you that it's there. I'd like to thank you all for your time. Thank you, James. Thank you, Tom, for giving us your insights today and your time. Please check out more details about the rest of the webinar series if this one's been of use for you. We can also offer you a planning and deployment workshop for anybody that is potentially interested in that. So please contact us on the details on the screen if that's something that would be of interest, and we can pick that up with you further. So I think, unless there's any other questions, which it doesn't look as if there's any more coming in, I'd like to wrap up the session, and thank you very much for everybody's attention.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.